This is Matt. Welcome back. In the last video, we talked about the difference between cognitive and emotive meaning. In this video, we're going to talk about the difference between vagueness and ambiguity. Vagueness and ambiguity are problems within arguments because a vague term or an ambiguous term or expression can mean more than one thing. And in our arguments, we don't want to shift in meaning from one premise to the next. We want to have the same meaning of these terms or expressions throughout the argument. So we need to recognize vague and ambiguous expressions because they might affect the validity or the strength of an argument. The first definition is vagueness, or a vague expression. Vague expressions are expressions that mean more than one thing, but they allow borderline cases. So in many cases it's really hard to tell whether or not we've got a case or not. So there's clear on one end of the extreme, yes, on the other end of the extreme, no, but we're not sure where to draw the line. So some examples would probably help you with this. So let's think of fresh. I like this example of fresh. So when you go to the grocery store and buy fresh produce, what counts as fresh? We know for sure that some things are not fresh. Things that are rotten. So you go to the grocery store and you see some strawberries that are moldy and you're like, okay, those are not fresh. I'm not going to buy those. And then we've got on the other extreme, strawberries at the You Pick place, where you go and you pick your own strawberries right off the plant. Now that is definitely fresh. Where we draw the line in between from fresh to not fresh, it's not so clear. Are the strawberries in the grocery store fresh? They might have been in that package for a long time, weeks maybe. Does that mean they're fresh? Well, do we say they're not fresh because they've been in the grocery store for so long? Well, where do we draw the line? Do we say that the strawberries at the roadside stand are fresh? Well, those might have been picked for hours. So why do we make the cutoff from hours or minutes or weeks? There's no clear way to answer this question. We just don't know. Here's some examples. If somebody says my job situation is more transparent, do you know what they mean? I don't. I have no idea what they mean when they say my job situation is more transparent. Maybe they just got fired. This could apply in a case your roommate comes home and they say my job situation is more transparent. I just got fired. Or they might have just gotten hired. Or they might have got a promotion. Or they might have a new boss. Any number of situations could apply when you say something like my job situation is more transparent. And we don't know whether this expression applies or not. So this is vagueness. Ambiguity also deals with expressions that can mean more than one thing. But the difference between vagueness and ambiguity is in a vague expression, we don't know where to draw the line when it comes to borderline cases. It's really hard to tell whether borderline cases apply. But when it comes to ambiguous expressions, they mean more than one thing, again, just like vagueness. But there are clearly distinct meanings given the context. So for instance, man found dead in graveyard. Well, without punctuation, this could mean two different things. And we know the two distinct meanings given the context. If the man is still alive, then we have a living man who found dead people in a graveyard, and it's not that big of a story. If the man is dead, then what they're saying is that a dead man was found in the graveyard. Man found dead in the graveyard. It could mean either one of those things, but there's clearly distinct meanings depending on the context. Same thing with tuna are biting off the coast. This could mean that there are giant tuna that are actually biting the coast and making the coast of California fall into the ocean. Or it could mean that fishermen are having success fishing for tuna. Could mean either one of those things. And there's clearly defined context. We know, once we know the context, we know which meaning we have here. Whereas in the case of vagueness, even if you tell us the context, we're not sure whether the term applies or not in the borderline cases. Sometimes we will run into disputes or arguments that deal with vagueness and ambiguity. We need to be able to tell whether or not people are arguing about facts or whether they're having a merely verbal dispute. Somebody who's having a merely verbal dispute, their argument hinges on vagueness or ambiguity. Someone who is having a factual dispute is arguing about what the facts actually are. So here's some examples to let you understand this. All right, in this first example, Wilson abuses her kids, I saw her spank one. The person who responds says, well, that's just discipline. All kids need it. So the dispute here is about whether or not spanking counts as abuse or discipline. This is a verbal dispute because the argument depends on what we mean by discipline, abuse, and whether or not spanking counts as discipline or abuse. This is a vague expression, whether or not something is discipline or something is abuse. We know the clear-cut cases on either end. Beating a kid with a baseball bat is definitely abuse. Giving a kid a timeout is discipline. And there are lots of gray area where we're not quite sure where to draw the line. And depending on who you ask, different people are going to draw the line in different places. So even if you know the context, you might not know whether something counts as abuse or discipline. All right, this next one, Barb told me that Freddie stole a computer. Barb hates Freddie and lies about him. He never stole a thing in his life. This one is actually not a verbal dispute because the argument between these two people doesn't depend on the meanings of words. What they are arguing about is the facts of the case. Did Freddie actually steal a computer or not? So I hope you understand now the difference between factual disputes and verbal disputes. Factual disputes are arguments about the facts. Verbal disputes are arguments that hinge on a disagreement about the definitions of words. And these verbal disputes can be based on vagueness or ambiguity.